The rain stung Caleb's face like needles as he stood on the curb, clutching a trash bag stuffed with his clothes. At 16, he'd been thrown out of his Atlanta home, his stepmother's venomous words, "No son of mine will be like that," still burning in his ears. But even as the world blurred through his tears, a fire sparked in his chest. He would survive, and he would prove her wrong. Caleb Jackson had grown up in a modest Atlanta suburb, where porches creaked under the weight of family barbecues and church hymns drifted through Sunday mornings. His father, a mechanic with a laugh like thunder, had been his anchor until cancer stole him when Caleb was 12. His stepmother, Diane, stepped in soon after, her strict rules and cold demeanor reshaping the house into a battlefield. Caleb's secret, his attraction to boys, became a landmine. He hid it well, or so he thought, until the night Diane found a love note he'd written to a classmate, Marcus. The paper, crumpled in her fist, was all the evidence she needed to cast him out. With nowhere to go, Caleb hitchhiked north, landing in New York City with $12 and a battered notebook filled with poems. The city was a beast, relentless, loud, and indifferent, but it was also a refuge. He found a shelter in Brooklyn, where a counselor named Ms. Rosa saw the spark in his eyes and handed him a flyer for a youth poetry slam. "You got something to say, kid?" she told him. "Say it loud." That night, Caleb stood on a rickety stage in a dimly lit community center, his voice trembling as he poured out his pain. His father's death, his stepmother's rejection, his fear of being unlovable. The crowd roared, and for the first time, Caleb felt seen. He kept writing, his poems weaving stories of loss and defiance. By 18, he was a regular at open mics, his words sharp enough to cut through the noise of the city. At one event, he met Javier Morales, a 19-year-old aspiring filmmaker with a crooked smile and a camera slung over his shoulder. Javier, who'd grown up in the Bronx with a single mom and a knack for capturing raw emotion on film, was drawn to Caleb's intensity. "Your words," Javier said after the reading, "they're like a punch to the gut. Let me film you." Caleb laughed, brushing off the compliment, but something in Javier's eyes, a quiet sincerity, made his heart skip. Their friendship bloomed over late-night coffee runs and debates about art versus survival. Javier filmed Caleb's performances, editing them into short, gritty videos that he posted online. The clips went viral, shared by strangers who saw their own struggles in Caleb's words. By 20, Caleb was a rising star in the spoken word scene. His name whispered in poetry circles from Harlem to the Village. But fame was a double-edged sword. The more attention he got, the more he wrestled with the ghosts of his past, Diane's voice, the shame she drilled into him, and the fear that success could vanish as quickly as it came. One night, after a packed reading at a Soho bookstore, Caleb and Javier sat on a fire escape, the city humming below. Javier turned to him, his voice soft but steady. "You know, Caleb, you're not just surviving anymore. You're building something real." Caleb looked at him, the weight of those words sinking in. For the first time, he wondered if he could let himself love. Not just the stage, but the man sitting beside him. Their fingers brushed, and in that fleeting touch, Caleb felt a spark of something he hadn't dared to hope for home. As Caleb's fame grew, so did the pressure. Invitations to festivals and interviews flooded his inbox. But each success came with a nagging fear. What if they found out how broken he still felt inside? He and Javier were now inseparable, their bond teetering on the edge of something deeper. But Caleb held back, haunted by the idea that love could make him vulnerable again. Javier, meanwhile, was carving his own path. His short films, often centered on Caleb's performances, caught the eye of a local indie film festival. One evening, after a screening, a producer approached Javier with an offer to direct a documentary about New York's underground poetry scene. "You've got a gift for showing the soul of a story," the producer said. Javier beamed, but his eyes flickered to Caleb, who was signing autographs nearby. The project meant long hours and late nights, pulling Javier away from their shared rhythm. Caleb threw himself into his work, writing poems that dug deeper into his pain. One piece, Exile at 16, went viral after Javier posted a video of Caleb performing it in a crowded subway station. The poem's raw honesty, lines about sleeping on park benches and dreaming of his father's voice, struck a chord. Comments poured in. "This is me. You saved me. Keep going." But the attention also brought trolls, their hateful messages echoing Diane's rejection. "You don't belong." Caleb tried to shrug it off, but each word chipped away at his confidence. One rainy night, Javier found Caleb sitting alone in their shared apartment, staring at his notebook. "You okay?" Javier asked, sitting beside him. Caleb shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "What if she was right? What if I'm not enough?" Javier took his hand, his grip firm. "She was wrong, Caleb. You're more than enough. You're changing lives." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Caleb wanted to lean in to close the gap, but fear held him back. Instead, he squeezed Javier's hand and changed the subject. The documentary project pushed Javier to his limits, but it also gave him a chance to showcase Caleb's story. He interviewed poets, activists, and shelter workers, weaving their voices into a narrative about resilience. Caleb agreed to be filmed, though he flinched at the idea of baring his soul on camera. During one shoot, Javier asked him to read Exile at 16, in the shelter where he'd first found refuge. As Caleb spoke, tears streaming down his face, Javier's camera caught every raw emotion. The footage was electric, but it left Caleb feeling exposed, like he'd given too much of himself away. By the time the documentary premiered at a small theater in Brooklyn, Caleb was 22, and his name was everywhere. The film, titled Voices Unbound, was a hit, with critics praising its heart and authenticity. At the screening, Caleb and Javier sat in the back row, their shoulders touching. As the credits rolled, the audience erupted in applause, and Caleb turned to Javier, his voice thick with emotion. "You made this real." Javier smiled, his eyes shining. "We did." In that moment, Caleb felt the walls he'd built begin to crumble, but he still wasn't ready to cross the line into love. Not yet. The success of Voices Unbound catapulted Caleb into a new realm. He was invited to speak at colleges, perform at national poetry slams, and even appear on a late-night talk show. His face was on billboards, his voice on podcasts, his story a beacon for queer youth everywhere. But the brighter his star shone, the darker the shadows grew. Diane's voice echoed in his nightmares, and the trolls online grew bolder, their attacks laced with homophobia and venom. Javier, now 23, was juggling his own rising career. The documentary's success led to offers from bigger studios, but he stayed loyal to his indie roots, wanting to tell stories that mattered. He and Caleb moved into a better apartment in Harlem, a cozy space filled with books and camera gear. Their friendship had deepened, but Caleb still kept his feelings locked away, afraid that confessing his love would risk their bond. Javier, sensing the distance, threw himself into his work, hoping Caleb would open up in time. One evening, after a particularly brutal online attack, Caleb snapped. He stormed out of the apartment, leaving Javier to find a crumpled poem on the table. "I'm still the boy on the curb, waiting for someone to want me." Javier tracked him down at their old fire escape, the city glittering below. "You're not that boy anymore," Javier said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're Caleb Jackson, the man who's changing the world." Caleb's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, he almost confessed. Instead, he hugged Javier tightly, letting the warmth of the embrace say what he couldn't. The turning point came when Caleb was invited to perform at a massive Pride event in Los Angeles. The stage was a sea of rainbow flags, and the crowd's energy was electric. As he read a new poem about love and survival, he locked eyes with Javier, who was filming from the side. The world seemed to fade, and for the first time, Caleb felt ready to take the leap. After the performance, he pulled Javier backstage and kissed him. A desperate, heartfelt kiss that said everything he'd been too scared to voice. Javier kissed him back, their laughter mingling with tears as the crowd roared in the distance. Their relationship became the anchor Caleb had always needed. They navigated the chaos of fame together, balancing late-night shoots with quiet mornings tangled in each other's arms. But the past wasn't done with Caleb. A letter arrived from Atlanta, forwarded by Ms. Rosa. It was from Diane, claiming she wanted to make amends. Caleb's heart raced, anger, fear, and a flicker of hope warring inside him. Should he respond? Could he face the woman who'd thrown him away? Javier held his hand as he read the letter again, the words blurring through his tears. Caleb wrestled with Diane's letter for weeks. Part of him wanted to burn it, to let the past stay buried. But another part, the boy who'd once hoped for her approval, wondered if she'd truly changed. Javier urged him to take his time, reminding him that he didn't owe her anything. "You've built a life without her," Javier said, kissing his forehead. "Whatever you choose, I'm here." At 25, Caleb was at the peak of his career. His first poetry collection, Curbside Dreams, hit bestseller lists, and he was invited to speak at a national LGBTQ+ conference in Chicago. Javier's documentary had sparked a movement, with youth shelters across the country using it to inspire kids like Caleb once was. Their love was a quiet strength, a safe harbor in the storm of fame. But Diane's letter gnawed at him, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. He decided to meet her, but on his terms. He invited her to a poetry reading in Atlanta, his first time back since he was 16. The event was held in a historic theater, packed with fans and local activists. Caleb stood on stage, his voice steady as he read a poem about forgiveness. Not for Diane, but for himself. He spoke of the boy who'd been cast out and the man who'd risen, his words weaving a tapestry of pain and triumph. In the audience, Diane sat stiffly, her face unreadable. After the reading, they met in a quiet cafe. Diane looked older, her eyes tired but softer than he remembered. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't understand you, and I let fear control me." Caleb listened, his heart pounding. He wanted to believe her, but the scars were deep. "I survived because I had to," he told her. "Not because of you, but despite you." Diane nodded, tears falling, and for the first time, Caleb felt a weight lift. Not forgiveness, but closure. Back in New York, Caleb and Javier celebrated with a quiet dinner on their rooftop. The city sparkled below, a reminder of how far they'd come. Caleb took Javier's hand, his voice soft but sure. "You're my home, Javi. Always." Javier smiled, pulling him close. "Always." The news broke a year later. Caleb Jackson, now 27, was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. His story, kicked out at 16, rising to become a voice for the marginalized, captured hearts worldwide. Javier's documentary was optioned for a feature film, with Caleb as a consultant. Their love, once a quiet refuge, became a symbol of hope. Their rooftop kisses splashed across social media with captions like, "Love is the ultimate rebellion." Diane's reaction came unexpectedly. Caleb received a call from Ms. Rosa, who'd stayed in touch over the years. "Your stepmom saw you on TV," she said, chuckling. "Fainted right in her living room." Caleb laughed, a mix of disbelief and vindication. He didn't need her approval anymore, but knowing she'd seen his triumph felt like a final reckoning. Caleb and Javier used their platform to advocate for queer youth, funding scholarships and shelters with their earnings. At a gala for one of their initiatives, Caleb took the stage, Javier by his side. "This is for every kid who's been told they're not enough," he said, his voice ringing out. "You are enough. You are everything." The crowd rose to their feet, and Javier squeezed his hand, his eyes shining with pride. As they stood together, the city skyline glowing behind them, Caleb realized the true meaning of his journey. It wasn't just about proving Diane wrong, it was about proving himself right. He turned pain into poetry, rejection into resilience, and love into a legacy. With Javier beside him, he knew he could face anything. The boy on the curb was gone, replaced by a man who'd built a life worth celebrating. How does this first draft align with your vision for the story? Are there specific elements, like the characters' backgrounds, the setting, or the emotional tone, that you'd like to adjust or emphasize more? Let's refine it to ensure it captures the drama, romance, and meaningful ending you're aiming for.